The officer, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash, called for backup, citing what he described as a potentially suspicious individual. As the man waited, his thoughts turned to the countless stories he'd read about similar encounters, each one a painful reminder of the assumptions and biases that often overshadow justice. Yet he chose not to speak up, letting the officer's actions tell their own story. With every passing minute, the tension mounted, leaving everyone, including the officer, on edge. What was meant to be a routine stop was quickly spiraling into something much more significant, though only one person there truly understood the gravity of what was happening. As the minutes ticked by, the sound of a second police cruiser pulling up broke the uneasy silence. The officer's backup had arrived, a younger cop who looked between his senior and the driver, clearly trying to gauge the situation. The first officer quickly filled him in, emphasizing the driver's supposed evasive behavior and the need to remain cautious. The driver, still seated in his car, couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the younger officer's demeanor. He seemed uncertain, perhaps sensing that things weren't adding up. The senior officer, however, was determined to assert his authority. He began questioning the driver about his purpose in the neighborhood, asking where he was going and why he was there. The driver answered calmly, his words measured and deliberate, but he could feel the weight of the moment. The longer this continued, the more onlookers gathered, their curiosity turning into quiet murmurs. Tension rippled through the air as the officer demanded the driver step out of the vehicle. The man hesitated for a moment, not out of defiance, but as if carefully considering his next move. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out, his posture tall and composed, exuding an air of quiet authority that seemed to rattle the officer. For the first time, the senior cop looked uncertain, as if sensing he might have underestimated the situation. Then it happened. A bystander who had been quietly observing gasped and muttered something under their breath. "Wait a minute, isn't that?" Their voice trailed off, but the realization rippled through the small crowd. Suddenly, the tension wasn't just between the officer and the driver. It was in the air, among the people watching. All eyes were on the driver, and the atmosphere grew electric, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the moment the truth would come out. The senior officer, oblivious to the murmurs spreading through the crowd, stepped closer to the driver, his hand resting near his belt, as if to emphasize control. The driver remained calm, though his sharp gaze flicked briefly toward the gathering onlookers. He could sense the shift in the air, the growing realization among the crowd. Still, he said nothing, allowing the moment to build naturally. Meanwhile, the younger officer started to look uneasy. He glanced at the driver, then at the crowd, as if piecing something together. "Hey, maybe we should run his ID again," he suggested hesitantly. His senior dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand, doubling down on his line of questioning, now sharper and more probing. The driver's composed responses only seemed to frustrate him further. Just then, a middle-aged man stepped forward from the crowd. Dressed in a business suit, he looked like he had just come from an important meeting. "Officer," the man said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Do you know who you're talking to?" The senior officer turned to him, irritated by the interruption. "Sir, I'm handling this," he snapped, but the man didn't back down. "You're not handling anything," the man replied, his tone steady but pointed. "That's the director of the CIA standing right in front of you." His words hung in the air like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs and freezing the officer mid-sentence. The younger officer's eyes widened in shock, but the senior cop scoffed, clearly not ready to believe it. "And I'm the president," he muttered sarcastically. But the man in the suit wasn't laughing. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Within moments, the sound of sirens approached in the distance. signaling that things were about to escalate in ways no one, especially the senior officer, could have anticipated. Welcome to today's story, a powerful tale of justice, perseverance, and unexpected consequences. Imagine this. A white police officer stops a man on an ordinary day, not realizing he's face to face with someone holding one of the most critical roles in the United States government, the director of the CIA, who happens to be a black man. What unfolds next is a striking lesson in humility, humanity, and karma. In this video, we'll dive into the details of this gripping encounter, explore its deeper implications, and uncover how it resonates with broader themes of respect, fairness, and accountability. It's a story that not only highlights an important moment of confrontation, but also showcases how life can deliver justice in the most unexpected ways. Stick around because you won't want to miss how karma plays a starring role in this extraordinary real-life drama. It all began on a quiet afternoon in a suburban neighborhood. The officer, a seasoned member of the force, was conducting routine patrols when he noticed a man sitting in a sleek black SUV parked by the curb. Something about the situation seemed out of place to him. Maybe it was the car, maybe it was the driver. Without hesitation, he decided to investigate. The man behind the wheel, dressed sharply but casually, appeared calm and composed. Little did the officer know, this was no ordinary citizen. As the cop approached, his tone carried an air of authority, expecting full compliance. The driver politely answered questions, his voice steady and self-assured, but he didn't reveal much about himself. As the exchange continued, subtle clues hinted at the driver's true identity. His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet strength of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. The tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. The officer, growing suspicious, asked the driver for his license and registration. The man handed them over without hesitation, his demeanor calm, almost too calm for the officer's liking. Something about the name on the license felt vaguely familiar, but the officer couldn't quite place it. Instead of focusing on that, he began pressing the driver with more questions, probing for anything that seemed out of line. As the officer's tone became more assertive, the driver maintained his composure, his answers precise but minimal. Meanwhile, neighbors started to peek out of their windows, curious about the scene unfolding on their normally quiet street. A few even stepped outside, their presence adding a layer of unease to the situation. Unbeknownst to the officer, the man behind the wheel had spent years mastering the art of staying calm under pressure. But even he couldn't ignore the subtle undertones in the officer's questioning, a tone that seemed to assume guilt rather than innocence. It was a dynamic he had encountered before, though rarely in such a personal setting.